Welcome to the week where we focus on performance management. One of the shortcomings of this book is that it really doesn't get into the practical aspects of tools for leadership. It provides a great foundation in terms of leadership theories and principles and things along that line. But as we constructed the design of this course, we felt that it was important to take a full week and really focus on performance management. One of the more important tools that a leader, especially a frontline leader, will use within their toolbox. So let's jump. Our objectives for this module are to define performance management as both a leadership tool and a business tool, and really create that link behind the structure for performance management and some of the theories that we studied to this point, specifically one. We're also going to take a very practical approach to both goal setting and performance coaching. And then we'll clarify how pay drives performance and even get that wrapped around incentives in general, not just pay, and get into some documentation which will be linked to your assignment for the week. So let's jump right in. When you think about the business of performance management, and I use that word business on purpose because when you talk to most, this will be a stereotype of sorts, but when you talk to many finance leaders within corporate America and even within nonprofits, the performance management, seems like a fluffy HR type thing, when really it's no different than strategic planning. It's mapping out how the work gets done and measuring that in the same way that we look at sales reports or P&L statements or forecasting from budgets. This is really something that looks at the people that are doing the work. And so if you look at the three visuals here, the managers have to define what the employees need to do to make the business move forward. And what you'll see as we work through this presentation is you can work that model forwards or backwards. And in most cases, the better situation is to work it backwards. If you start out by saying, what do the managers need to do to get the employees to work more so that the business moves forward, you may start driving the business around what the leaders or leader wants. I once worked for an organization where a new senior leader came in, and within 6 months of that senior leader coming in, the entire organization, rather than just saying what's best for the customer, would say, and I'll use a fake name, what does George want, or what does Mary want us to do? And to some degree, it's good to have a dose of that, but when it filters everything that you do, every decision that you make, and it's all about that one person and what they want you to do as opposed to what's best for the customer, to some point you lose the judgment of employees. So we focus on working backwards. What does the business need to accomplish to move forward, to compete, to grow whatever it is that they're addressing from a social cause, to help students succeed, whatever that business is, the business of school, the business of nonprofit, the business of corporate America. And then what do the employees need to do to drive that business forward? Most organizations are driven by the front line, whether it's, again, a for-profit or not-for-profit. And so it's driving the thought process of what do employees need to do to get the organization to move forward, and then what do managers need to manage the employees to do. Now, the overlying question at the bottom here is what incentives drive productivity is an important one to consider, because depending upon the organization that you work for, it could be a number of different things. You think about you and your own career, and there's probably been times where you've been driven by money. There's probably times you've been driven by title or responsibility and scope and challenge. Even the person that you work for is an incentive because you like going to work with them or you don't like going to work with them. And so one of the things that's important as we work through this chapter here is really to think about how incentives drive performance. It's what gets measured gets done, but also what gets incented gets done. So if your bonus or your comp or your performance review and your merit increase is tied to you doing something, you're more likely to pay focus and drive your energy around that than if it's not. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's think back to one of the theories. If all work equals tasks and people, as we studied earlier in this course, then one might say that all performance is results and behaviors. And the reality is that we kind of look at things as mapping the two together. When you look at work in total, If tasks drive results and people are what drive behaviors, then it makes sense that if you're trying to improve the tasks of work, you focus on the results. But if you're trying to improve the performance of, the people of work, then you focus on their behaviors. What happens here is when you think about gap analysis work, and so we're at point A and we want to get to point B, people blend and blur these two, and it gets a little funky and confusing. So they might say, well, how do we get Joe on our team to perform better? Well, he should move from selling 10 widgets to 12 widgets. Yeah, well, that doesn't tell him exactly what he has to do in order to move from selling 10 widgets to 12 widgets. It might be, instead of using question A at the beginning, use question A at the end of the conversation. So when you think about tasks and people, recognize that leadership, performance management, goal setting, coaching, it really revolves around one or the other, those results or the behaviors. You could have a result around those widgets, or you could have a result to use that question A at the end of your conversation. And what's most important to understand around this is that there's a difference between emphasizing one over the other. It's almost like kind of getting into the ends versus the means, right? So the results are to some degree the ends of what you're trying to accomplish. 12 widgets or 15 widgets a week are sold. Whereas the behaviors are the means. And as a leader, you have to understand that it's two-part really in how you look at that. One is, do you kind of really care how they get to point B, how they get to those results of moving it from 10 widgets to 12 widgets. And you may in some cases, and you may not in some cases, and that's okay. But the other side of it is around behaviors, is recognizing if you want to set an employee up for success and you just tell them to work harder, they're not going to know what they need to do different. And so from a coaching perspective, we often define the difference between fixing and teaching. So let's use that as a transition here, setting employees up for success. When you bring a new employee onto a team, the most important thing is to share onboarding. What's the team culture? What are the team goals? How does the individual play into those team goals? The research shows that the more that an individual can connect what they do to the greater good, the more committed that person will be to doing that good work. And you study Deming, and he shows that 90+% of employees come to work wanting to do a good thing, but it's the processes that management puts in place that get in the way. And so you start with the onboarding, bringing them in, orienting them to the team, orienting them to the work, and again you go back to the tasks and the behaviors. But setting the goals and the expectations is really about both the results and the behaviors. What is it that you want to achieve, and how is it you want them to achieve it? And it's important. Most people dislike really the term micromanagement, and I really think it's an important piece for setting employees up for success from the beginning. And the last piece is around performance coaching in terms of what is it that you want people to improve on. Again, the goal behind performance coaching is not to dwell on the past, but really set employees up for the future. Though we'll talk about corrective action and how that fits in. So SMART goals. Odds are most of you have seen or heard something around SMART goals, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But you see the SMART acronym on the left. The easiest way to explain this is everyone can generally agree on the target as a total. So you see the blue visual there. But can you really define on what the bullseye is? And if you gave someone a goal of communicating better, the reality is that they could potentially do a couple of different things, and it may or may not improve the situation. But if you know exactly what the pain point was, then the reality is you might be able to truly define that bullseye. So look at the bottom right there. Send weekly updates from each Friday to all project team members that calls out whether tasks are red, yellow, green, and what actions are being taken in the upcoming week to address all red and yellow tasks. Okay, so that's a huge difference between communicate better. You're talking about laser focus in pinpointing what it is you're trying to do, and you can see the difference between communicate better and that specific sentence on the bottom. It's measurable. You can see whether it came out every Friday. It's realistic. You're only saying once a week. It's attainable that way, and it's time bound as well. So it gives you a quick glimpse, and I'm sure you've seen this, and I'll give you some feedback in your assignment for this week. But use this as the model to really focus on things. All right, so coaching. Coaching is one of the more complex things in performance management. Through the years, it's really been called 17 different things depending upon what the current trend is. But the reality is you're a supervisor, you have a direct report, you're responsible to make and find ways to make your employees be more productive than they think they can be by themselves. So you're responsible to lead the work and manage the work, as we talked about earlier in the semester. Most people oftentimes hear this popular approach called the sandwich model, which is say something good and tell them something bad, and then say something good again. And I'm going to strongly discourage the use of that model. It really just sugarcoats things, and if you've ever had an Italian hoagie that was all bread and no meat, you know that all you taste is bread. And the same thing holds true for these conversations. If you have all good sandwiched around a point that you're trying to make that's constructive, then the reality is that you're not really going to deliver a message that will be heard. The hard thing is that most people think of coaching as, events, one-time conversations that happen once a month or once a quarter or in one-on-ones. And the reality is that we should look at coaching as every conversation that you have or every conversation that you don't have with an employee that helps sets them up for success to be stronger in their performance, to be more likely to achieve or exceed their goals, and to be stronger with the behaviors that produce those results. So again, we're going to focus on working backwards. If you know what the results are, all the way to the right here, you know what the results are that you're trying to have your team member achieve, then the reality is you can work backwards and say, well, what are the tasks that drive that results? And what are the employee behaviors that drive those tasks? And then you could focus on the person. Figure out how do you work with that person, because every person's different. How do you work with that person to drive those behaviors, to fuel those tasks, to create those results? And so it's working backwards. And the reality is that this is called coaching, but in most organizations, we're looking at it in terms of profitable coaching. All right, documenting performance is really the last piece of focus that we have here. And the key here is that, and I'll start with the bottom bullet, every employee that manages another employee should have a personal file and a personnel file for that employee. The personnel file sits within human resources. It's all the different employee transactions that may have happened, hiring, promotions, salary increases, formal HR transactions. The personal file is something that the supervisor should keep under lock and key in their desk or online in a confidential way that summarizes performance conversations. And so if you think about the annual review is the formal personnel document. The day-to-day diary of discussions that you've had, whether it be a printed email or a documented conversation, in a good way. It doesn't have to be all constructive. It could be some of the great things that employee is doing, or an attaboy, attagirl email that you got from one of their clients. But the key for those those documents is that they be factual. Kind of just think just the facts. Objective, so it's not really getting into why you think that is, whether it gets in. It's almost like with the interviewing skills that you go through. You can't ask questions about personal situations, or so for example, if there was a new mother that came back to work and you thought maybe that was influencing their productivity, the reality is you cannot document that. You document specifically that the productivity has gaps. You don't document that you think it's because they have problems at home, or if somebody just broke up with their boyfriend, or there's another person that might have a spouse that's on military leave, or whatever it might be. The reality is the focus here is on creating documentation that's factual and objective, and to some degree it's prescriptive. Here's what they have to do to get into good standings, and you probably write that in kind of a smart, formal way that way. So the key, this is a real quick hit on performance management. One of the best books out there is Aubrey Daniels' Bringing Out the Best in People, if you're looking for more on that. And it really gets into some of the behavioral science around coaching and performance management. The reality is that as you become a leader of people, it's more important for you to be able to get the most out of your people, and your productivity is not judged based on how good you are individually, but how good your team is. And even more so, if you were to be promoted or move out of that role, how good is your team without you? So are you setting them up for success long term that way? So I hope you enjoyed the recordings and look forward to seeing your assignments. Have a great week.